College football nerds here talking Jim Harbaugh, and as the title said, Hugh Freeze for you Michigan fans. And look, we have fairly caught a lot of heat, Josh, from our Milton video from earlier in the year and being jumping the gun a little bit and being excited about Michigan after they beat Minnesota. And now here we are talking about firing a coach and who they should replace him with. But that's not just 2020, that's every year. And a lot of coaches are getting let go and teams are making moves. And we think Michigan should make a move now. And look, I would be shocked if Harbaugh is the coach next year. But we're talking the hypothetical or what should happen of they should fire Jim Harbaugh and they should go after Hugh Freeze. And just so y'all know, I told Josh kind of my thoughts on this earlier today, but I haven't heard his thoughts yet. So maybe he completely disagrees with me, and this is a fun video. Let us know in the comments what you think Michigan should do, and if you think Hugh Freeze is too toxic, or if you should go for it. All right, Josh, I'm going to tell you why I think they should go after Hugh Freeze, and then let you kind of tell me if I'm crazy and if it's not worth it, with the understanding that there is a 50-50 chance that he will get your team the death penalty in 10 years, within 10 years if he's there. That's just who Hugh Freeze is. Okay, so my whole thing is what we've seen in the last few years is offense trumps everything. But what we've always seen since the dawn of time is if there is a huge talent gap, the great equalizer is a great offense. And to me, right now, there's a big talent gap in Michigan, and there's going to be a big recruiting gap at Michigan for a while, for the foreseeable future, because they're going to have to rip the Band-Aid off, get through a bad divorce with Harbaugh, inject some new life in, but it's going to take some time to establish that they're a program that's going to be five-star city like Ohio State. Who are they competing with? Every year, who do they have to beat to get over the hump? They got to beat Ohio State. They're not going to do that with a great defense. You can have the most defensive-minded coach in the world and have a really great defense, but how do you close the gap fast? Look at Ole Miss. Look at where they were last year. Alabama could have beaten them 104-6 if they wanted to. This year, they put up some points on Alabama. I think offense is the only way to go. It's a great equalizer. And of all the guys out there available this year, the one that's going to immediately turn your offense around, I don't care what your personnel is, it's Hugh Freeze. You got to go get him if you want to win in the immediate future. Tell me what you think, Josh.
I think Hugh Freeze is the perfect fit in terms of scheme, in terms of what he brings to the program and recruiting and what you need it to be. If you're Michigan, like you said, you got to get an offensive-minded coach. You've gone defense a lot, but it's pretty obvious at this point that you can't win at the high level in college football unless you have good offense. And there have been guys that are really good head coaches that have brought in great offensive minds, and they've done well as a result. I mean, obviously, Saban is not an offensive coach, but what he has done is brought in elite offensive coordinators. Ed Orgeron, I don't think he's an elite head coach. Haven't thought that. Didn't think it last year. But what he did do is he got Joe Brady, who was a brilliant offensive coordinator, and won them a title. I think, maybe you could look at somebody like, Elliott at Clemson. I'm a little skeptical if you're Michigan on taking someone that's only has offensive coordinator experience. Also, I don't know how many great offensive guys are really out there. And for example, Clemson's Elliott has done really well, but he's done it with talent that's way above what everybody else has. And they haven't really been overly consistent offensively. A lot of their victories have come, despite having a ton of offensive talent, more due to the fact that the defense has kept them in games. What Hugh Freeze gives you is a guy that has been a head coach at a Power 5 program, a guy that recruits at a high level, though I'll touch on that in a second, and a guy that knows how to do offense. And he runs a high-power, up-tempo offense that gives you a lot of potential to score points even against elite opponents. I am going to turn that around, though, and give you two negatives. The first negative is scheme. He does run a high-power offense. He can be very, very effective. That offense also sputters. The sort of up-tempo offense they run has high variability. And if you want to have a shot to beat Ohio State, it's the kind of offense you want to run. But if you're under the delusion that you're going to just wake up, have a new coach, and go 12-0 next year, you're probably going to be disappointed. Because, for example, in 2015, Ole Miss beat Alabama. And Ole Miss was in line to win the SEC West and knock Alabama out of the SEC championship game. You likely have a different national champion in 2015 if that happens. But they lost to Arkansas in overtime. And they did that because their offense, sort of sputtered and let Arkansas hold in it. The defense collapsed. They lost the game. They also lost a Memphis game where they only scored 24 points. And that was an unranked Memphis team that year. And I think that's the reality with Freeze, is if you hire him, you need to understand you're going to lose a couple games every year. You may go 10-2 a lot, and it's going to take a truly exceptional year for you to go 11-1. But you will probably get the sort of offensive talent, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown. Those are guys he recruited, and you can win a championship with those in the right year and the right time. The problem with Freeze is totally related to the toxicity. That 2015 team, that team had a lot of guys that ended up being investigated by the NCAA and were almost assuredly being paid. I'm just going to be blunt. And the other reality for that team is the end of the year, they kind of quit. When they lost to Florida and they had Kim Dichie was under investigation, you had Laramie Tunsil on that team, and we all know how that went on the draft for him. They didn't play well late in the year. That was the other half of the story with the Arkansas loss. That was part of the story with the Memphis loss. You've got to worry about the toxicity issue with Freeze in the way he's run a program. And a lot of it to me is how much you actually buy that he's changed who he is as a person and a culture. Or even if you don't buy that he's changed it as a person, maybe how much you buy that he's changed his approach and how he needs to handle the program.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, to put it blunt, he was cheating like crazy. He pissed off every coach in the SEC with how bad he was cheating. And look, Ole Miss fans, if they're watching this, might get mad. They're not watching it, so it doesn't matter. Hugh Freeze and that Ole Miss team, you're not five-star city overnight. And this is what I always say. Like, he had a year at Ole Miss where he was like, his first year where he was like 6-5 or, something like that, like 7-5. It was that kind of year. And then the next year, he had like a top 5 recruiting class. That does not happen at a landlocked school in Mississippi with a guy who came from, the high school ranks. That doesn't happen. Yes, if you are a dormant, crappy Southern Cal and you bring Nick Saban in, even if you had a bad year the year before, you're going to recruit like crazy. If you are, sorry guys, I've been dealing with something all week. If you're in Miami and you get some kind of recruiting momentum, it makes sense. People want to play, South Beach. It's fun. Oxford, Mississippi, sorry. No. You don't become 5-star city overnight, especially with guys that aren't taking visits there. They're just committing. It doesn't happen. Having said that, I do think that Michigan is at a, let's talk about like, maybe not so much, the toxicity or whether or not you would personally hire Hugh Freeze in a vacuum, but whether or not it's worth the risk, given that I think Michigan is at a pivot point here where they make the wrong hire now in terms of actual production and wins on the field. They are really running the risk of getting in that Nebraska zone where they used to be a national brand that could get 5 stars and compete with Alabama for 5 stars. And now they've had enough mediocrity, and then talking about Nebraska, that they no longer are a national brand. And once you lose that national brand recruiting heat in the era of the internet and how things go, you may not ever get it back. So to me, it's worth the risk, even if he gets him on probation in 5 to 7 years and they take a little bit of a hit. NCAA is a little more toothless now. I think it's worth the risk because he's going to inject energy and life into that program. You bring Campbell in from Iowa State, he's going to bring a tough-minded defensive team that's going to go 8-4. And he's maybe going to get one good win. He ain't going to beat Ohio State. So tell me, maybe not so much Hugh Freeze in general, but Hugh Freeze for staving off mediocrity and being forgotten, is it the move they have to make right now?
I think they need something like that. And you alluded to something related to Freeze's success. Why was Hugh Freeze successful at Ole Miss? Because he brought in one class, Robert Nkemdiche, Laramie Tunsil, and Laquan Treadwell. And first, I want to make a point that I made a lot as sort of maybe a mini aside. Those three guys ended up being the number one player in their position in the draft. And I had looked it up one time, and in like 15 years, it was the first time that the number one recruited a position, and they were the number one recruit at uh, strong side defensive end, offensive tackle, and wide receiver. Pass rush, receiver, left tackle. Basically what you want on a roster. First time in like 15 years that the number one guys at each one of those positions in the same class all happen to be the number one guy drafted at that position in the same class. Or at least, I think, first round picks. Normally you have busts. So that's the thing, right? Even if Freeze doesn't work out, if you bring him in, he's going to got guys on the roster. And I think the most impressive thing about him was he brought in Chad Kelly. He was a 5-star washout at Clemson, shored up the quarterback position, and made them competitive after Bo Wallace. And in some ways, Kelly was better than Bo Wallace at Ole Miss. They don't beat Alabama if they played the guy that was behind Kelly. I don't even know who he was, but Kelly was an NFL talent. Really, talent-wise, NFL starter level player, just a head case. He managed him. He was an absolute time bomb, but he managed him and made it work. At Liberty, he's gotten Willis from Auburn, and he's made him into a good quarterback. He's done what Harbaugh wanted to do with Patterson, but he's actually made it effective. And that's the thing with Freeze is I do think if you bring him in, he's super shady, but he's going to recruit well, and he's going to get guys that actually, he has a track record of getting players that actually do pan out on a roster. My concern is they were toxic around the time he left. There were problems in that locker room. And, you talked about cheating, and again, we're just going to be blunt with this. I mean, there are different levels of cheating throughout college football. And I think every program has some level of $100 handshakes. It's almost impossible to stop that. Some booster is going to give somebody $100 because it's a buddy's buddy, and here, go get yourself a nice dinner. That happens. It's not a huge deal in my eyes. But we're talking more like systemic, ultra suspicious level stuff. As you said, I don't think Nkemdiche was the number one overall player in the country. I don't think it even, if I remember right, hadn't even visited Ole Miss. And there were a couple examples of that. I forget, there was some other like defensive lineman, and he ends up committing to him. That was the kind of crap that was going down. And look, there was actually somewhat documented that they were caught, that they were doing things they shouldn't have been doing. And so if you can get Freeze, I think there's a chance that you end up in some sort of scandal with your program, but at least you're going to get talent on the roster, and at least it's going to fill out. I'm not sure that's not a better option than a lot of the things put forward. And given in the current, at least right now, looking to be a toothless state of the NCAA, maybe that's what you do. I just think if you do bring him in, you need to bring him in and be really clear that, look, we're not going to put up with that. You don't bring him in and say, hands off, do what you will. And I think I said this in something else recently because I feel I'm in a major sense of deja vu. We're going to turn a blind eye and let you do what you will. Because, yeah, you may win faster that way, but you'll wreck the program. I think if you have a controlled Hugh Freeze, you could be really successful.
I will offer a counterpoint that maybe he doesn't have to cheat so much if he's recruiting for a brand name and not for Ole Miss. It's a lot easier, especially now. He can be like, look, recruits, here's who I put in the NFL from Ole Miss. Look, recruits, I took Liberty into a team that was dominating ACC teams. So what am I going to do for you at Michigan when you're a 5-star? I think there's some of that there. He will at least, if nothing else, be able to recruit a quarterback. And not only that, he'll be able to develop a quarterback. And that is something that Michigan, ironically, has not been able to get from Harbaugh. And I think that Michigan fans would probably right now trade the great defense that they've had the last few years for losing a couple of weird games if they have consistency on offense and they know, we might lose to Ohio State, but we're going to lose 42-35. I think that they would take that right now and run with it. We didn't mean for this to go long, so I don't have a whole lot more to say, but I would love for you to give me a parting shot on Hugh Freeze at Michigan, and we'll wrap it up.
My parting shot is pretty simple. It really all boils down to what you want your program to be, what you want your identity to be. If you're focused on winning football games, Hugh Freeze is the guy that's going to get you there. Um, but if you really want the focus of your program to be about the way you're perceived, about your culture and identity, I don't know that you touch him. If it were my program, I'm not sure I'd touch him. And I don't know that I want him the head coach of my own school. It's a lot easier to say that this is a great idea as an outsider, and I see this all the time. Like, you got to hire this guy. You know, screw everything else. If you get this Hugh Freeze, you're going to be the best program ever. Well, that's great when you don't have to own the result of it. But when you've got to own what that means for your program, and you've got to own the 10, 20-year effects of that on your brand, that's a very different decision, and it's certainly a different decision for an AD. So for everything we said, I actually do totally get it if the administration just says hard pass, we're not going to do it, and you view them as untouchable.
All right, y'all. That's it for us on this one. Please let us know in the comments, one, if you think Michigan should go after Hugh Freeze, and two, who you would go after. Who is your perfect hire if you could get the guy that's out that's reasonably available? Don't say Nick Saban because you're not Texas fans. The guy that's reasonably available. Who's your number one on your short list? If it's not Hugh Freeze, let us know. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week, and God bless.